Welcome. In this podcast, we're looking at the newspapers that Londoners read over the years. This is an audio podcast being broadcast over the video channel, Old Stuff Show, using the audio portion only. London has had a very interesting series of newspapers in its history. I personally enjoy looking at the hard copy newspaper on a Saturday morning over a cup of tea and breakfast. There's just something about that feels good. But certainly online news is becoming mostly used today, and the newspapers are having a hard time staying alive with their hard copy editions. But most of the history of London has seen newspapers as the primary source of news for the people. And if we look back, we've had a number of newspapers. It starts back in 1831 with a newspaper called the London Sun, and that lasted for only a couple of years, 1833. Then there was a paper called the Canadian Free Press, which came out in 1849. And this was sold to Josiah Blackburn in 1852, and that became the forerunner to the London Free Press, and the Blackburn family was involved in that for years. There was also the London Evening Advertiser, which started in 1863. Now, the Advertiser tended to be the liberal newspaper of London, while the Free Press was mostly on the conservative side. But the Advertiser was bought by the Free Press in 1936, so London became a one newspaper town at that point. The Advertiser office was located at the corner of Richmond and York Street on the northwest corner. And the Free Press was up the street on Richmond Street, just south of Queens Ave on the east side of Richmond. London also, a lot of people don't realize this, was the location of the Farmer's Advocate and Home Magazine. It started in 1864, and it was produced right here in London, and had many years of publication. The London Echo was another newspaper, but this was published weekly in the 1950s. And I was looking at a copy which I have the other day, and a 1951 copy said that it cost 5 cents per copy or $2 per year. And so that's kind of the rate of papers in those days. In 1980, a unique newspaper came out. It was called the London Tribune, and it was founded by Mark Emery, of note. And but it lasted only a few years. I have the first copy of it. It was actually a pretty good newspaper. It covered a lot of news, a lot of local news at the time. Now, of course, Londoners also read newspapers that were not published in London. The Globe and Mail, for example, has an interesting history. There was the Globe newspaper, then there was the Mail and Empire, and they joined together in 1936 to become the Globe and Mail. And the Globe and Mail still is a popular newspaper with many Londoners. There were side things that came along with some of these newspapers. There was the Weekend Magazine, later the Canadian Magazine supplements that were supplements of the Free Press. I know some people that collected the photos of the NHL and CFL players that were featured in those magazines over the years. There was also the Star Weekly, and many people used that to make scrapbooks. It was full of photos, and I've seen scrapbooks about the royal family and the Dion quintuplets, which were favorite topics. Now, of course, the newspaper was delivered by the newspaper boy, a delivery boy. And that person would have a couple of dozen customers who he would deliver the paper to daily. Then they would collect the money at the end of the week. So it was a great way for a young person to earn a little source of income. There's some odd things that I've discovered about how the newspaper was used. In the 1950s, it was very common for all the grade 13 final marks to be published in the local newspaper beside the student's name. So certainly there were no privacy laws in those days. That's hard to believe. Also kind of hard to believe was the fact that there was often an article that would be written about someone who had gone away on vacation. That's how trusting society was in those days, I guess. But it showed up in the personal columns often, and it mentioned where people were going and when they were going on vacation. I guess today that would be like putting an ad in the newspaper for someone to rob your home, but not in those days. The old newspapers, there's some similarities to today. I've looked through many of the old papers. There's many products that are still the same. I've seen products like Red Rose Tea and Jello, for example, that were advertised way back then and had the same kind of appearance on their packaging. But the Free Press, which most of us got in the older days, they had both a morning and an evening edition, and the two were delivered during the 1950s through 1981, when the evening edition was discontinued. So the newspaper has had some important roles to play. I know during the First World War, it was reported that that people were so keen on staying up with the latest of what was going on that they would actually have a bulletin board outside the Free Press building for people to read the latest. So news was somewhat slow, but people wanted to know about it. But the advertising in the paper was kind of interesting. When you look at some of the old papers, you look at the pricing, for example. I look at ads for grocery stores, and you see things like bananas were 19 cents a pound, and you could buy a jar of peanut butter for 31 cents, and the prices were cheaper, but so were the wages, of course. And there were movie ads that were advertising the latest movies that today are classics, the Gone with the Wind movies and so on. So newspaper, unfortunately, is taking a little turn for the worse in today's world, but they're still around, and people still enjoy reading them, and I'm one of them. So I hope you enjoyed the brief history of newspapers in London in this podcast. Podcast is available on my youtube.com, Old Stuff Show, and search the newspapers Londoners read over the years. And there are many other podcasts that I've done so far, so have a look. Thanks for listening in, and hope to enjoy. I hope that you'll do that again soon. Thank you.